Welcome, everybody. I'm excited to have you here. This is Redistricting 101. It's a bit of an overview for anyone who is new to the redistricting conversation. You're just getting involved because you've seen it in the news. We wanted to provide you with some of the latest information and hopefully give you some idea of how you can get involved. So we're going to kind of get rolling here. I've got a few slides just to help visually, so I'll share my screen in just a moment, but please know that that is not the only way. Hopefully, if you're watching this even after it was live, if you're watching this on YouTube or a recorded video on Facebook, then that's great. Please, you are always welcome to send your comments, questions to us. You can send an email to info@peoplenotpoliticians.org. Actually, you can send it straight to me. Andy at letsfixthis.org would be fine as well. All right, well, I want to give a brief overview of what redistricting is, how we got here, and where we are at in the process. My name is Andy Moore. I'm the Executive Director of People Not Politicians. Presumably, if you're watching this at any point, it's because you found out about us and were interested. So I hope you're somewhere having lunch right now if you're watching this live, or a tasty snack if you're watching it recorded later. All right, let me share my screen right quick, and I will go through a few slides. So I'm just going to click through them this way. I think that's probably easiest because I'm going to click through some other tabs with some additional information that I think might be relevant to the conversation. So I've got a few of my slides that I have just kind of updated some. I'm also going to go look at some of the slides that the state legislature has put together, because honestly, I was going to copy and paste their images, but you end up getting a lower quality. It's like that movie Multiplicity, right? With Michael Keaton. You get a lower quality every time you do that. So we'll get into it. So a little bit of background about us, People Not Politicians. We are, we're a coalition of concerned Oklahomans who arguably want to end gerrymandering in our state. Not arguably, we definitely want to end gerrymandering in our state. And we'll talk briefly about what gerrymandering actually is in just a moment. I was at the doctor this morning myself, seeing a orthopedic doctor because I'm a man of a certain age, and we started talking about gerrymandering. He didn't know a lot about it, although he is someone who is somewhat involved in politics, and we had a really robust conversation. He was very interested. So anyway, People Not Politicians was started, 2 years ago by a group of organizations, two of which you may have heard of: the League of Women Voters of Oklahoma and Let's Fix This, which is another organization that I run. But we are not the first ones to have this conversation, of course. The discussion about redistricting, about gerrymandering, has been going on for hundreds of years, or a couple hundred years in America. And you may have even heard comments from people like former President Ronald Reagan, Congressman Bob Dole, John McCain, even the governor himself, Arnold Schwarzenegger, who has been a very outspoken critic of gerrymandering. And so this redistricting comes about following the census, right? So every 10 years, in years that end in zero, the United States Constitution stipulates that we must conduct a census. And that census, the goal of that census is to count every single person who currently resides in the United States, in that year. It is not just voters, it is not just citizens, it is everybody of any age who's in the United States in that year as a point in time count. Last year, of course, was that year, 2020, that ended in zero, and that's when we had the 2020 census. And doing a census is an enormous undertaking and very difficult, and it drives all kinds of aspects of civic life. A lot of funding formulas are based on the number of people that are in a state or a city. Also, a lot of government funded programs are, and other programs for that matter, a lot of private institutions and foundations use census data as the benchmark because it collects more information than just the number of people. It collects data about all of us, right? And by now, hopefully you all submitted your census data last year. Otherwise, they badgered you until you did. Well, in the years that follow the census, we have what's called redistricting. And that is, so typically in years that end in one, the goal of redistricting is to redraw all of the congressional districts in the United States and the state legislative districts in each state to reflect changes in population. So in America, we have what's referred to as the one person, one vote standard, meaning that each of our votes should count with equal weight within our state, at least, right? When you get to the national level with the presidential election, you've got the electoral college and things get a little, the math gets a little funny, but in general, it's an idea of how we equalize people's votes. So there's really two parts of this. There's apportionment, which is apportioning out or giving out a number of congressional seats in the U.S. House of Representatives based on the population of each state. And then there's the drawing of those districts. So as we'll discuss in just a minute, Oklahoma had 5 congressional districts for the last decade, and we will maintain 5 districts for the next decade. We gained population overall, but we didn't gain enough. We would have had to gain a lot to get a 6th seat, and we didn't lose, or we didn't grow too slowly, so we didn't lose a seat either. We used to have 6 seats several decades ago, and we lost we lost one, so now we're down to 5. So who does redistricting will vary state by state. In some states, they have commissions. Sometimes they're independent citizen-led commissions. Some states, they're independent, like politician-appointed commissions. And in some states, the state legislature is in charge of doing it. We've seen a trend over the last decade or two towards using commissions rather than having state legislatures draw the districts themselves, for a very obvious reason, right? Because it puts the power back in the hands of the people. And it means that politicians don't get to continue to draw their own districts. So this is like a wild part of our democracy right now that can and should be reformed, is that right now the Oklahoma state legislature and their handpicked staff get to redraw their own districts. So one of the rules that they use is that no one will get drawn out of their district. They'll maintain everyone. Well, aren't the point of redistricting is to redraw the lines so that everyone's vote counts equal? And now they will do that, but they also will do it with a mind of, well, let's make sure we don't draw anyone out. So if you are a incumbent and you live, near the edge of your district, the shape of your district might change, but they're going to make sure that you stay in there. Even if you term out in 2 years, even if you may not get reelected next year, they're going to draw it with that as one of the criteria, which just seems to really put the power in the hands of the incumbents, of the politicians themselves, and not in the hands of the people. So we'll get more into that in just a minute. We're going to talk about some of the data. So the population from the census for Oklahoma that was reported last year is now 3,959,353. I think this is an increase of about 100,000 people, maybe a bit more than that. We'll check a different slide for the data there. So the Census Bureau released that information last year, back in April of this year. So they got all the information and they released it back in April, which is typically when they would release or begin releasing the full data set for redistricting. However, everything was delayed, right? The census wasn't completed until later because of COVID, which meant they then had to process all the data, which took time. And so they got out those big totals back in the beginning, which is what they needed to apportion the number of seats around. But we didn't get the final data until August 12th. I believe. So we've had the data. Every state has had the full data set for a little over a month now. And indeed, we've seen a number of states already release their draft congressional maps, and in some cases, state legislative maps. Now, from that total, the total number of people in the state, we can derive how many people need to be in each type of district, right? So we'll call it the ideal population or ideal number. 4 congressional seats, of which there are 5 in Oklahoma. That ideal number is about 791,000. I guess closer to 792,000. For the state Senate, there are 48 state Senate districts. They need to have about 82,000 or 83,000 people. And then for the state house, there's 101 of those. So that's 39,000. So these are obviously an increase over what they have been because our population increased. Now, when they draw the maps, the House, State House, and State Senate can be plus or minus 2.5% from that ideal number. And that range was decided upon by the legislature. And that's, as an outsider who has done a lot of studying and research about this, that's a decent range, right? That gives a full 5% kind of variance. And that can be really helpful when you're drawing some of these smaller districts like state house districts, because if you have it much smaller than that, then you sometimes have to make difficult decisions to like cut up a neighborhood instead of keeping it whole, keeping that community of interest together. I mean, you think about, 2.5% of a state house district is just a couple of thousand people, which could really just be a small neighborhood. Now that's different from the congressional maps. Those, according to the US Constitution, must be drawn down to the person, right? As close as practical. Now, there's a lot larger areas, obviously. And so the way it comes out, because there's like a remainder in here based on the, obviously you're dividing a prime number. It comes out to, I think all 4 of the districts will have one district will have 791,871, and then the other 4 will have 870. So it comes down to very close. And so related to that, I'm going to pop over to a different tab here. The state legislature has been doing town hall meetings around the state. They did a bunch. Back in last December and January, and then they did one last week. And they've got thankfully, they published all of their slide decks on their website, on the House and Senate. This is on the House website, although kind of both chambers have used basically the same data. This is helpful. It plots out Oklahoma's population over the last 100 years, 110 years, which is interesting to see how we've grown, right? It's a pretty steady rate of growth, or at least number of, not rate, but a steady number of people increasing. And what we saw, this data, I think, so this is from the population estimate data. This is not the final data. We have that here. Okay. They just put out a new slide deck last week. So here we go. So this is based on the 2020 census data. Darker green counties exceeded the statewide growth. So overall, the statewide, we grew by about 5.5%. Darker green counties grew even faster than that. The kind of middle green grew, but were a little bit slower than statewide. And then anything that's kind of that yellowish color lost population, right? So, and it has on here the actual numbers of how many people and the percentage. And so you'll see, darker green counties like Oklahoma County here in the middle grew by a little over 10%, almost 11%, which came out to, I think, about 100,000 people. Canadian County really jumped up. They grew like 33%. Tulsa County grew again almost by 11%. And then you've got some counties that lost a lot. Cotton County down here lost, excuse me, lost about 11%. Beaver County lost about 11%. Harper County lost a little over 11%. And so lots of shifting around. Wagner County, which I hear is a contentious county between two of our congressmen, that grew up quite a bit as well. And so overall, the trend you see is that urban and suburban areas grew while rural areas lost or shrank, lost population. Now that trend is nationwide. It's not just in Oklahoma, but it's certainly pronounced here. And so that has an impact on the size and shape of the districts that they have to draw. As I mentioned, Oklahoma gets 5 seats. Other states went around. So like Texas gained 2 seats. Montana gained a seat, Oregon gained a seat, Colorado gained a seat. California actually lost a seat, as did New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio, all the purple ones. And so there's some kind of shifty nationwide, and that's a whole different conversation that I'm less interested in because I'm more concerned about what's happening right here in our back door. So this is the map of the congressional districts as they stand today, the ones that we've used for the last 10 years, basically, right? So you've got CD1, which is up in Tulsa. It ended up being the fastest growing, or had the largest population growth of any of our congressional districts. So it's kind of a funny shape because there's some counties up here that are funny shaped, right? Tulsa County is like a kind of a weird half of a plus sign. Washington County is this little narrow sliver up here. So that's CD1, and it includes Wagner County, which I mentioned grew quite a bit. And because these counties grew, that means that in order to equalize things, that district will have to, basically kind of get smaller, if you will, right? Because it's more densely populated right now, and we have to shed some of that, give some of those folks to some of the other districts that need to add some. So you can see CD1 grew by 36,000 people. Well, CD2 over here to the east and southeast lost almost 70,000 people. Getting lots of spam calls today. Lost almost 70,000 people. And that means that, some of these folks have got to go over here. Likewise, so you've got, we'll go to CD3 next. So it lost about 6,000. CD4, I think gained 6,000. So that's a bit of a wash there. I mean, within one person, you can find 600 people. You can just flip them from one district to the other, and that job is settled. And then CD5 right here, which is most of Oklahoma County, excluding, if I zoom in, excluding this little sliver here, which is basically Tinker Air Force Base and has traditionally been in CD4. Oklahoma County, Pottawatomie County, part of Seminole, I guess all of Seminole County, that has been CD5. So there's lots of conversation about what's going to change with congressional districts 1, 2, and 5, mostly, right? How these will shift. Now, obviously, 1 and 5 have some people to lose. 6 needs to gain some folks, and that makes sense to try to find those folks here. And there's a simple way to do this, and there's more complex ways to do that. And the problem, I guess, we go back to the fact that politicians are allowed to draw their own districts, and that means there's, well, perhaps different interests in mind than just simply equalizing population and keeping communities together. There may be perhaps political interests. Now, the legislature has said that they're not using political data for this. However, I think, many folks who even pay attention to some of this data casually can make some fairly accurate assumptions about partisanship of a particular part of town just from knowing what you know about that part of town and from seeing all the other maps on the news and, read information. So even though they may not specifically have that data in their software program this time, it doesn't mean, I don't think there's any way they can 100% say we're not using this, right? Particularly if it's drawn by people who live here and who work in politics, which is who's drawing it. It'd be one thing if they hired in an out-of-state firm who had no awareness of this and had some kind of, blind double-blind system to draw the districts, that's a different story, but it's not how they're doing it. So a bit of a recap on timeline. I mentioned earlier that the state legislature held a number of town hall meetings back in the winter of 2020 to 2021, right? It really was, I think, a few in November and then mostly December and early January of last year, way before we had any census data. And the purpose of those town halls was to visit with the public, share about the process, and ask for feedback about how these lines should change. Now, the hard part about this was that was during the initial peak of COVID, right? So participation was undoubtedly reduced, right? They had a handful, 3 or 5 virtual town halls, but not super well publicized. It's tough to even get the media to pay attention to some of this stuff, even though this is something we only do once every 10 years, and it has enormous implications for our government, the composition and the framework of our government in our state. So they had those town hall meetings, and they allowed the public to submit maps for consideration, which is a big deal. That's something that has never been done before. As far as I can find in news clippings, there haven't even been that many town hall meetings. So this is all a good step, right? Even if it's just for show, at least they're showing something that they haven't done in the past. So back in the spring, they allowed the public to submit maps, and we did. We submitted one. A number of other people submitted one. I think there was around 8 or 10 maps for the state house and the state senate each, and they even invited us to come present those maps to them and answer some questions and kind of talk about them, which again has not been done before and was very helpful, and I think as a good step, right? A good goodwill gesture for the public. Now, at the end of all of that, in late April, the legislature released the maps that they had drawn. They, said that they used some of the public feedback to inform their map drawing process. All of that was done with population estimate data, right? So the Census Bureau, in addition to doing the decennial every 10-year census, they also do other surveys throughout the year and, use the magic of mathematics and statistical analysis to estimate population sizes of every city and state. And so some of those estimates are based on, 3-year and 5-year data collection efforts. And so they used the 2014 to 2019 American Community Survey based population estimate data, which honestly was the best data available at the time back in April. However, it is very different, as we've learned, from the actual census data that they have to use for redistricting. So back in the spring, they went ahead and used this estimate data. They drew the maps and they passed them. The governor signed them. They're into law. Now, there's also a phrase in the law that says, we're going to pass these, and then if any districts are more than 2.5% above or below what the final numbers look like, we'll come back and redraw them in the fall and have a special session to approve them. Well, once the data came out in August, we all learned that those estimates were not remotely close, right? I think 90% of districts in both the House and Senate were beyond that 2.5% margin and thus have to be redrawn. And so effectively that means all the work that was done back in the spring is out the window, right? Like it wasn't like they have to tweak just a couple of districts. It means they've got to redo the whole maps. Now, they've already drawn them, and so they've done some of the work. So in theory, it shouldn't take as long, but here it is, more than a month later. I mean, it's been 5 weeks since that data was released, and we haven't seen anything. We haven't seen any maps. We haven't heard rumors of it. In fact, the best we know is that they've said that they expect to release the maps a week or two before special session, Well, special session was initially rumored to be scheduled for October, but it's now widely rumored to be held or to begin November 15th, which is another 2 months from now. So, as of today, I asked the Princeton Gerrymandering Project how many states have already released maps. Oregon, Colorado, Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Nebraska, New Mexico, Ohio, Texas, the Senate at least, and Virginia. So that's 10 have rolled out or in the process of rolling out their maps this week. There's a group of academics at Princeton University who've been studying this very closely, and they're keeping tabs on it. And it's been really interesting learning along with them or from them. But yeah, so 10 states have already released maps, including big states, New York, Texas. Like these are not insignificant ones. Some of those states, like New Mexico, I know has maybe a map that is going to be more similar to Oklahoma's, but Texas has 30 some odd congressional, I guess they've just the Senate, but they still have, I think they've got this week, maybe today, they're releasing their congressional map. So they've got 30 some odd districts. This is a big deal. It's not just odd, it's concerning that we haven't seen the maps in Oklahoma yet. So I'll share my screen again and show you the, this map is, I think, academically interesting, but a little difficult to follow. So because it's hard to see the lines. So the dotted lines are the county boundaries, and then the darker solid lines are the House district lines that were drawn back in the spring. Now, the point here is really the colors. So that the dark green districts, and this is a zoom in of Oklahoma County, and this is a zoom in of Tulsa area, or Oklahoma area and Tulsa area. Dark green areas are districts that they drew in the spring that are way off because population was way higher, right? So HD 41 is like 41% or nearly 40% more population than was expected from the estimates. Purple districts, dark purple, are the districts that are the most below the estimates. So as you can see, only a handful of like the white districts are the ones that are okay and might not need to change. The rest of them have got to shift around quite a bit. The Senate, they just released it as a table, which again, you can kind of see that there's some districts that are 11% over, 8% over, and then some that are considerably under as well. So they've got a lot of work to do up there. And here's their map. It's also difficult to see. However, all of these maps are available on Dave's Redistricting. So if you go to davesredistricting.org, which I know sounds silly, but it's a legitimate website. In fact, it's a tremendous website. It's a free resource from a bunch of passionate map nerds, right? Who they built this, I think, following the 2010 census and the 2011 redistricting cycle 10 years ago. It's a free tool that anyone can use, and it has all of the maps and districts and census data loaded in there, right, for every state. So when you first go to the website, davesredistricting.org, there's a map of the United States, and you can click on Oklahoma, and it'll take you to that state. And you can then pick House, Senate, or congressional maps and get into it. Now, we're going to have another training here. I think it is this Friday, looking at my calendar, this Friday at noon on the 24th, that's all about Dave's Redistricting. Well, we're going to walk through it and show you how you too can draw a map using Dave's Redistricting, because the state legislature is again allowing the public to submit maps for consideration for the congressional maps. They're not going to go back and have us resubmit state legislative maps, which is a little unfortunate because, as I said a minute ago, they got to redo the whole thing, right? Well, I mean, we've been looking at it. There's a bunch of us in the community, fellow map nerds, right? Who there should be some kind of good term for like political cartography nerds. If you have any ideas, please let me know. But a lot of folks have already put out several maps, and about House seats as well as congressional maps. We've been able to do it in the last 30 days or 45 days. I don't know why the legislature hasn't released any maps aside from, well, aside from the fact that they don't want to, right? There's a political advantage to the incumbents to keep their maps secret until as late as they possibly can. If they don't release maps, right, then all of us, the public, don't know with certainty what district in which we're going to live. So I can look at the maps they pass in the spring, and it tells me my House and Senate district. I can look and, I know where I live and I can look it up. But that may not be the case when they redo them, right? Lines will change. I think both my House and Senate seats have to lose some population, so they've got to change in size and might shift around. And the caveat here is that if you're an incumbent, right, if you're a politician in office, the rules say, you're going to stay in your district. Well, that, if you're in Senate District 46 or, 22 or whatever, you're going to stay in that district. There's like 2 that move, but those people are terming out, so it doesn't matter. All the incumbents who remain there are going to be in their district. And so anyone else who wants to run for office, for state house, state senate, or congressional, doesn't actually know with certainty what district in which they live until those maps are passed. And that makes it really difficult, right, or dicey to start mounting a campaign if you're planning to run for office. And so let's say you live in a district and you believe you are a better candidate than the incumbent, and you think you could beat them, and you've probably done some modeling, you've knocked doors, you're building relationships, and the incumbent gets word, right, that you're going to run against them. Well, maybe they're able to, through their connections, bump that line so that you're now in a different district. And now you're not running against them. You could still run for office, but against somebody else. And maybe that's someone you don't think you can beat, or someone you don't want to beat, right? Maybe someone with whom you agree. And that's a disadvantage to you and an advantage to the politician, the incumbent who's already in office. So this is the issue that we talk about gerrymandering, I think, nationally in terms of, Democrats and Republicans, and which of these 2 parties is trying to hose the other party, right? And that's a whole other issue. There's a book behind me, Breaking the 2-Party Doom Loop, that we can talk about how this duopoly of these 2 parties and their bickering and fighting is bad for democracy. One of the ways that happens is through gerrymandering, right, where it's this tit for tat. In Oklahoma, the Democrats gerrymandered for 100 years. The Republicans are in charge now, and they've done it for the last 30 years. And so here we are fighting about this, when really maps should be drawn to reflect the people and to create a representative and fair system. So there's all this to say, they should release the maps now so the public can comment on them, right? There's no reason they can't. In fact, many of these other states that have released maps have released them so that the public can view them and submit their comments, so they can take those comments into consideration and maybe revise and redraft maps before they're actually passed. That's the process by which we could provide information. The way that they've proposed to do it, or they've said they're going to do it, is release the maps just a week or 2 before they vote on them. And if it happens based on the timeline that everyone's talking about, if they go to special session on November 15th, that means they release the maps sometime in early November. Well, that's like right after Halloween, or they'll, watch them release the maps on Friday afternoon of just before Halloween weekend, right, when no one's paying attention because everyone's focused on getting their kids' costumes and candy ready and fall festivals and whatever. And then it happens just before Thanksgiving when no one's paying attention because we're all worried about Thanksgiving and thinking about family and friends and COVID and all that. And so to bury the information is a disservice to the public, to the voters of Oklahoma, The way that redistricting should happen is out in the open. It should be done transparently. It affects every single Oklahoman, regardless of where you live. You will be assigned to a congressional district, a House district, a Senate district, county commissioner district, right? These school board wards, all of these things trickle down. And for a handful of people in a big, limestone palace at 23rd and Lincoln to get to draw the lines is unfair and untransparent. And in the words of Ronald Reagan, undemocratic, right? All right, so the way you can be involved up next is I've got a few important dates here, and I'll actually share this so you can see it again. This is again from the House and Senate's presentation. So they held a virtual town hall last Wednesday, September 15th. You can go watch it. They shared these slides, but no new information. October 10th is the deadline to submit those congressional maps for consideration. It's only 5 districts. It's pretty easy to draw. Again, you can draw a whole bunch, and you can submit one, but you can publish the rest on your Facebook, on your blog, whatever you want, right? Like, what a wonderful world where we have a veritable buffet of options of maps to weigh public comment and consideration and pros and cons of all these things, and be able to look at them and say, oh, well, these maps are clearly no, these maps seem promising. Let's look at those more closely, examine the differences, and really get feedback from the public to make a decision that is best for the public and not just best on, the politicians, if I'm being honest. Okay, I know I'm on that soapbox because it's the truth, man. That's why. All right, so the week of October 18th, they will then invite the public to present those maps. And then November, TBD, at some point, the committees will unveil their legislative and congressional redistricting plans. Again, why November? There's no reason they couldn't do it today, right? I would bet you dollars to donuts that they've got, if not a final plan or a handful of plans, they've got a very close to the end plan ready to go. And even if it's not final, put out a draft. Let's see the maps. Show us the maps. All right, so if they don't, the only way to get them to do it is from pressure, right? So this is where you come in. I'll get to that in a second. Until then, November's the date. Then sometime also later in November, a special session. We've heard November 15th would be when they would start that. It will likely run for 4 or 5 days, which is the bare minimum, unless they end up going into special session to address something beyond just redistricting, right? The governor could issue a call that would include other issues. Some members are calling for that, masks, all vaccine mandates, these kinds of things. Hopefully they have a narrow focus. They get in and do the work they need to do, but they do so in a way that allows the public to actually comment and be involved in the process. My cat is going to join us. Once passed in special session, those new maps will go into effect for next year. And then look, 10 years from now, a new decade, and the cycle begins anew. It would actually begin with the census in 2030 and then redistricting in 2031. If you're interested in submitting a map, there's some requirements. We will go over these on Friday in our lunchtime session there. There's a link to Dave's Redistricting where you can go on there and create an account. You have to draw it for the congressional districts. You have to be a resident, all of those things. If you have questions about redistricting, you can contact the committee staff directly. For the House, their email address is redistrictoklahoma2020@okhouse.gov. And for the Senate, it's just redistricting@oksenate.gov, which I think makes good sense. You can also contact any of your individual House and Senate members. Whoever it is representing you, you can contact them and ask questions and give comments, right? All of that information is supposed to be flowing to the staff for the House and Senate so they can log it in their in the public feedback reports that they update. It's a big PDF document they update. So I encourage you strongly, if you're interested in redistricting, and you're not sure where to start, right? Like you think, I want to draw a map, but I kind of want to know what they're thinking already. Let's push them, right? Like there's no reason, no good reason why they've not released the maps already. We should give them a nudge and tell them, hey, just put it out there. We're not saying, you just say it's a draft. You don't have to say it's the final maps, right? But say this is a draft map and we are looking for public feedback on what this map looks like. Because the public deserves to know, right? They won't just wait to the end. And then this isn't like, I feel like they treat us with the way that a lot of folks, probably me sometimes, respond to our kids, where you say you get what you get and you don't throw a fit. That shouldn't be the way democracy works. We should get to see the maps and provide some feedback, because we'd get better maps. That's the idea of allowing public comment. Okay. If you have any questions right now, I'm going to pop over to see if there's any feedback no feedback on Facebook yet. Nothing here in Zoom. Again, if you have any questions, you can reach out to your House and Senate members, to the redistricting staff, or to me. And for more information from us, please go to peoplenotpoliticians.org. We will update and put these videos on there. I've got a big list of updates that I've submitted to our web guy to update the website, but we really need your help. And we really want the general public of Oklahoma to be informed and engaged with redistricting, and that I can't control everybody. I can control me. You can control you. Let's together, like, start here, right? Let's do this thing. Okay. I'm going to sign off so I can go eat some lunch today as well. I hope you have a lovely week. Enjoy the cooler weather, and I hope you can join us on Friday for a how-to with Dave's Redistricting. Bye now.